So back in 2019, that moment when your dad says Satoshi Nakamoto is the man of the future, he should be on Time Magazine. What's going through your mind? Do you remember that moment?
Yeah, or I think it was right before COVID. I don't think COVID had quite happened yet. So I was back home visiting my parents in Nebraska. And around this time, I've been studying acting. I lived in LA. I didn't know what I really wanted to do in the film industry, but I knew that I wanted to tell stories and I wasn't sure yet what that was going to look like. So I was in Nebraska and I was trying to figure out, how do I get into the film industry? I have no background in film whatsoever. What's so funny is I went to USC for college, and that's actually one of the best film schools in the country. And unfortunately, at the time, I did not know I wanted to get into film, so I didn't major in it. That was a really big missed opportunity. But, in the film industry, I think one of the big challenges is finding a way in. There's no one way to break into the film industry. And I think that's why, there's a really big barrier there. So, I was back home in Nebraska. My dad was like, well, maybe you should write a script and you should look at Satoshi, like read this book. And he gave me The Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean. And so I read this book and I was just blown away. And I knew nothing about money. I studied business in college and I just had no idea about money and all the ways money is manipulated. And it just felt, and I was never a very political person. And this just woke me up. And I just felt like I became this libertarian of really starting to have a passion about our financial system and how screwed up it is. And I just couldn't believe that I had never learned any of this until that moment. So between that and then learning about Satoshi's story, just in general, how we don't know who this person is and how he could just create this, I was so drawn by who is this person and what life experiences did he have to sit down and say, I'm going to create this money, this form of money that nobody can debase, nobody can control it. And to me, that was kind of the major moment that got me interested in Bitcoin and also from a storytelling perspective. And so I was like, you know what? I don't know how to get into this film industry. I love Bitcoin. This is fascinating to me. And so I think then COVID hit and I actually just stayed in Nebraska. I moved out of LA. I stayed in Nebraska near my parents. And my dad's like, you should write a script about Satoshi. So I started writing a script about Satoshi. And my dad and I kind of actually did it together. And it's probably a horrible script. I have not visited this script since 2019. But it was really just kind of about what life experiences Satoshi could have gone through to get to this point. And that story was meant to make an everyday person understand how they can relate to this technology. So I wrote this full-length feature film. It's like 110 pages. It's probably not very good because this was like my first ever script I ever wrote. And then I kind of got to the end of this and I was like, well, I have no idea how to get this made. I don't even know how to revise the script. I knew nobody in the film industry. I knew nothing about production. I mean, I knew absolutely nothing. So I was like, well, I watched all these Bitcoin documentaries and I felt like, oh, and to rewind, I first kind of got into, when I first started writing the script, Ben Prentice started. I don't know if you know Ben Prentice, but I remember I met some people through Twitter or Clubhouse. And he was one of the first people I met just online. And I was like, I'm writing a script. Can you help me? Like, I don't understand proof of work and all this. And I was sending it back and forth with him. And he was so helpful and so kind and just helped me understand the technical aspects of this, which is very complicated. So shout out to Ben for all of his help back then. But after this process of having the script, I was like, I have no idea how I'm going to get this made. So I watched a bunch of Bitcoin documentaries and I felt like there was an opportunity to tell a story about Bitcoin, but in the form of a documentary. And I felt like a lot of the documentaries that we have great documentaries, but they all focus on a different time period, kind of the early cyberpunk days. And that was kind of where the documentary sprung from was, I think there's an opportunity to make a Bitcoin documentary. And I think we need to focus on what's happening today and just everyday people. So first of all, I said my dad introduced me to Satoshi Nakamoto's story, which is pretty crazy. So my dad is, I don't want to drop his age, but he's 70 years old and he got into Bitcoin in 2015, which is pretty early for, I hate to call him a boomer, but he's a boomer. So I think that was really cool. And he kind of had, during the 2008 financial crisis, that's the first time in his life that he really looked at the financial system and said, how the hell are these things happening? Like, how do we have these crises? And he was impacted by that crisis, and he just saw all the destruction that happened. And that's the first time he really kind of looked into Bitcoin. I think he got introduced to it through Real Vision. I think back then Real Vision was the World Crypto Network. And then he got into Bitcoin in 2015, which to me is pretty cool. But yeah, so that's kind of like the starting point of the documentary. It was pretty a wild experience, but I just kind of got to a point where I was like, I do not know how to get in this film industry. And I think there's no one way to do it. If you want to create something, you just find your own unique path to create it. And you don't let anybody tell you no, even though they will 1,000 times before you get a yes. But yeah, that's kind of the early beginnings of this.
It sounds like almost a trial by fire. I don't know how many people think, oh, let me read this Bitcoin book, and then like, I need to make a documentary about this whole ecosystem. So I think that's a very, very unique approach to read the book, Lauren, and be like, I'm going to be a director now. Is that the first, like, did you make YouTube videos before? Did you do like other creative mediums, or was it just straight like, let me write a 110-page script?
Yeah. So I was a volleyball player my entire life. I was always an athlete, but I was also had this very big creative side. I was always very artsy, and my mom is like that too. And so I always kind of had a creative side in me, but I was always an athlete until I was probably 23, 24. I think I actually don't even really know like what I want to call myself. I'm a director and co-producer and writer of this documentary alongside David, but I kind of consider myself like this creative generalist. I love to just find something that needs to be created and find a way to create it. That's kind of like maybe more like a creator. I would consider myself that, like less of a director, but more of a creator. So yeah, I think it was that moment. I was like, I just want to create this. Like, this is cool. And I see an opportunity and I want to find a way to make this happen. And it was a massive learning experience for me because I've never made a film. So yeah, it was crazy. I'm still mind blown that I've got this documentary sitting there. I mean, this was a long process. 2019, I think David and I started working on it together officially in October of 2021. And here we are. It's available now to watch, but it's 4 years later. It's pretty crazy.
And then what was the attraction primarily? Was it like ideological because of your dad and like how it's different than 2008 and maybe what happened there? Was it just number go up, or was it more technical interest into Bitcoin? Because you don't see many volleyball players saying, Bitcoin film now, this is amazing. So what drew you to it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I think I've always kind of been interested in, I hate to say nerdy things, but kind of nerdy technical things. I'm not a technical person. I was never a software developer. But I'm very much interested. Like, I love the movie The Big Short, for example. So I've always been kind of interested. Maybe I didn't know at the time when I watched it what exactly it was completely about and the significance of that event. But I was always very much interested in these things. But I don't think until I got into Bitcoin, I really understood the significance of all of this and how big it is and how much it affects our everyday lives. But I think for me, like, I saw a lot of times in my life where my dad was stressed about money, or I saw money, be kind of the demise of families that were around me. And I never really understood what was behind all of that until I got into Bitcoin. And I think that moment of getting into Bitcoin and seeing how money really works really just clicked for me. And then understanding the kind of pressure and the things my dad, of a dad that is providing for his families, had to go through, And I think it just it actually made my dad and I bond a lot more. We got really close after I got into Bitcoin, and we're still very close. And I think it was just like a cool moment that now I'm very passionate about. I think it's because I saw my dad go through all of this. And yeah, I'm not sure. It's a good question. I don't know if I had a perfect answer for it, but I would say that's probably my best answer.
There's no perfect answer. I think you mentioned this trend of money. And when you're building a documentary, the first thing you might not think about is the finances for it, but very quickly after maybe writing the script or thinking about the documentary more, the question comes is, how do I finance this shoot where you guys flew to some amazing destinations all across the globe? So talk to me about that process and maybe what unlocked momentum for you, where you really started to get the capital you needed. Plus, how do you even budget for that? What do you do?
Okay, so this goes back all the way back to my Clubhouse days. So when I first got into Bitcoin and I said, I'm making this documentary, I don't know how yet, but I'm going to find a way. So I first started off on Clubhouse. I had no Twitter followers yet. My dad was like, oh, I think all the Bitcoiners hang out on Clubhouse. So I'm like, okay. So I created an account and I just sat in the audience, and I was terrified to speak to people. And I just knew that I was going to have to, at some point, show people that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to Bitcoin and build trust and network. And so Clubhouse really was my starting place. And I think that's where I originally met you and eventually got connected to Jason Williams, who is an executive producer of the documentary and the first person to actually commit capital to the film. So I owe Jason a lot. He's been a huge supporter. He's an awesome guy. So, I first started off on Clubhouse and it was just networking. And I had maybe 20 followers on Twitter and I never tweeted. So I was like, you know what? If I'm going to get people to respond to my DMs, I'm going to have to not be private. I'm going to have to tweet things. I'm going to have to find a way to stand out. And so what I started doing was I started making these Twitter threads because I'm like, I want to make a Bitcoin movie. I love film. So I'm going to make these threads about Bitcoin and movies. And so I found a way, and some of those went viral. I mean, relatively viral, like 2,000 likes. And I think that's the first time people started following me and associating me with film and Bitcoin. And I think that was very helpful in getting people to respond to my DMs and take me more seriously. I think that was a very important step. But I got introduced to Jason through a friend, and he was the first person to like the idea and say, look, if you can find someone to do this with you, I'll put in money. So I had Jason committed and he was a huge supporter. And then I got connected to David, my current film partner, and who we co-directed this together later that year. And after that, I was able to then tell investors, I've got this great director and producer to work with me. And that was massive on helping my pitch.
How did you meet David? That's such a crucial inflection point.
Yeah, I didn't know anybody and I just was kind of networking, but every little person that I did know, I was talking to everybody that I could. And I was just getting intros to everybody. And we ended up getting introduced through Eugene Jarecki, who David has worked with. And Eugene has done incredible documentaries at the highest level. I got connected to Eugene. Eugene was like, I'm in Berlin and I won't be able to be a part of this, but you need to talk to David. He's the best. And he connected me to David. And from there, we just decided to partner on this. And what was cool is this was David's first introduction to Bitcoin. He had never been into Bitcoin or knew much about it. And so I think that's why the partnership was so great, because I knew too much about Bitcoin and he knew nothing. So we had a really great balance there as co-directors, and now he loves it. It's been really cool to see his journey kind of getting into Bitcoin from the beginning in this production till now. And it's been cool to his experience from beginning to end. And yeah, now he's very passionate about Bitcoin. So it's been pretty cool.
Is there anything that came up in that co-directing where you he had an epiphany about Bitcoin, or you were able to cross the chasm with him of why Bitcoin's so important, or kind of, because the co-directing, it's you're both trying to pull the script effectively in the film in one direction, and you both have these ideas of what it is in your head. And so not having different beliefs about Bitcoin or different understandings about it must have made it some parts difficult, but also just because you're so passionate about your side of the Bitcoin story. And talk to me more about how that interplay works.
Yeah. No, I mean, you don't see a lot of co-directors because it's very hard, but I think we were lucky that we have a great dynamic in the sense of I am not a documentary expert. He is. He's a documentary expert. And so I think I lean on him to help guide me in this process of making the film, but he leans on me about Bitcoin information and that side of the story because I do know Bitcoin. And so I think we've got a great dynamic where we've got a very strategic division of labor because we both have our strength, and we're lucky that it worked out really well.
That's all that matters. Yeah. So you're directing this film, you're sitting down with people like Michael Saylor, Jack Dorsey, Adam Back. Who surprised you the most when you're having those conversations? And who did your team interview versus maybe you? I know you guys had a lot of people working on this. You didn't get to interview every single person, but talk to me more about those conversations and maybe who surprised you.
I would say one of my favorite interviews was Saylor. And I just remember, one, he was really hard to get. And I did not know if we were going to get him in this film. And I'm telling you, I tried every way possible to get him in this film. And finally it worked.